Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Williams Selyem webinar series. Someone just knocked on my window and said, hey, you dupe, your mic is not on. So I'm so happy that you can actually hear me now. That's a little bit better. And welcome back to the Williams Selyem webinar series. It's so happy to have you join us from all over the country. I'm so enjoying the mentions in the chats about where you're visiting from, what wines you're opening, and so happy to have you join us here. We're live here in sunny Healdsburg, California. The sun is shining. The vines are starting to turn color a little bit. There's a slight crisp in the air. Beautiful time of year, and so happy to be able to share this fun webinar with you today. And let me also mention really quick that we had a couple fun comments I wanted to throw out there. We had some folks making some delicious food out there, some amazing wines, and Rob Gibson shared a really quick story about how he had a chance to meet Marge Williams back in the day when he visited what used to be the old barn out in the Allen Vineyard. So that's really cool too. So thank you everyone for joining us. Make sure to continue to say hi in the chat. And actually, we're going to be doing a Q&A at the end of this presentation. So we'd love to have your questions. Go ahead and start sharing those as well. And we'll be picking some of the top comments and the top questions to be able to address at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd love to get this party started, and let's do a little webinar. All right, so the webinar today in October 2020 is going to be a vertical tasting of the Allen Vineyard and the Rochioli Vineyard. This is going to be so fun. We've got 3 different vintages from each vineyard site that we're going to be sharing with you today with a couple of special guests. But before I get into the details, I wanted to mention one quick fun thing that we're going to do today. We just finished producing a brand new vineyard map because every year we tend to have a new fun vineyard to share with the portfolio. And so with that said, I wanted to start off the webinar today by asking a trivia question. Now, if you happen to know the answer to this trivia question, then what we're going to do is we're going to send you a copy of the brand new vineyard map signed by Vice President and Director of Winemaking Jeff Mangahas, maybe even a little greetings on there as well for you. So here is the trivia question. If you know the answer, enter it into the comments, and the first person to answer correctly will get a copy of that signed map. So the trivia question is as follows. Williams Selyem entered the California State Fair, and we won the sweepstakes prize. If you can name the vintage and the wine that won the sweepstakes prize, you'll get that signed copy of the map. I know some of you may be asking, I'd much rather a signed bottle instead. That's actually, we're not legally able to give away any wine. So we're looking forward to sending a signed map to you if you happen to guess that wine. So we'll be looking for that in the comments. Good luck to you all with that. Again, the sweepstakes winner, wine and vintage in the comment section. So why did we pick this theme today? We picked this theme because we've been getting a lot of questions about wines as they age. When is the best time to open them? How do our wines develop with age? And so we thought it'd be fun to take a couple of what we consider our Grand Cru vineyards in our portfolio and get a chance to share that with you today. So we'll get a chance to do a little deep dive into each of the vintages, why we selected those, and then a little bit into in particular vineyards, the Allen Vineyard and the Rochioli Vineyard. And we have a couple special guests to go through those wines with us today. The first guest I'm going to introduce is Vice President and Director of Winemaking, Jeff Mangahas. Jeff, welcome to the program, man.
Hey, great to be here. Excited to try these wines with you guys. So yeah, they're tasting wonderful. So yeah.
Thanks for, I barely have seen you the last couple months. So it's good to see your face and have you here joining us today, along with Vice President of Sales and Marketing, Mark Malpiti. Mark, welcome to the program, man.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you.
All right. And last but not least, our lead tasting salon host, both virtually and physically, since we started our virtual tasting program, that is Sandra Montgomery. Sandra, welcome to the program, man.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight, and appreciate you joining us for the demystifying of wine and food pairing. So I hope you had a chance to check that out, and thanks for coming back tonight.
Yeah, cool. So let's see. Has anyone guessed the special bottling yet? I haven't seen.
There is a correct answer in there. I don't know.
There's a correct answer. All right. Oh, I see one. Was that the first one? Let me check my notes. Yep. Brett, you are the winner. So let me pull up Brett's comment here.
Woohoo!
Brett Broussard, congratulations, man. You selected the correct answer first from the YouTube channel. It is the 1985 Rochioli Vineyard Pinot Noir. So that was the first vineyard designate of that wine that we produced that won the sweepstakes in the 1987 California State Fair. And arguably that's what launched Williams Selyem into the Pinot stratosphere to where we sit today. So congratulations, Brett. We'll be in contact with you so we can get that signed map with a love note from Jeff shortly. So congratulations, man. All right. So with that said, what I wanted to do next is I wanted to have Mark take us through a history of the first vineyard we're going to be tackling. That's going to be the Allen Vineyard property. So Mark, why don't you take it away?
All right. And, you know, it wouldn't be complete if I didn't make fun of Scott for muting, because we only rehearsed for 2 hours. So anyway, but thank you.
I'm muting you, Mark.
So Howie Allen purchased the what is now the Allen Vineyard in 1970. It was an old prune orchard and directly across the street from the Rochioli Vineyard. So he went and talked to Joe Rochioli and talked him into planning and managing the vineyard. So we planted it to Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And, you know, he had been looking for a vineyard spot for a while and worked with UC Davis in trying to find the right terroir that would mimic Burgundy. And it just so happened that Joe Rochioli had pretty much a similar idea a few years before. So the Rochioli Vineyard was basically a blueprint for the Allen Vineyard across the street. As most of you know, Bert and Ed started their winery, Hacienda del Rio, actually, back in 1981, which turned into Williams and Selyem in 1984 in an old garage in Forestville. And so as they started making premier wine and working with Joe Rochioli and Howie Allen, Howie decided that they needed a building, a winery, to actually make wine in and to get out of the garage. And so he had a barn at the winery, which he converted to a barrel room and put in a couple of offices. And, you know, it was still pretty rudimentary. I wouldn't say it was, you know, it's a step up from the garage, but it wasn't that much of a step up. It had no cooling except for the Sonoma County fog at night. It had no drains. But it was definitely better than the garage in Forestville. So the relationship continued to grow with them. And Joe, to this day, Joe and his family, Tom, is still farm the vineyard. Back in 1998, when John Dyson bought it, he talked to Howie and established, you know, a new contract with him so we could keep making the Allen Vineyard Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And it's where we still crush and ferment the wine today. One of my favorite things, I got to know Howie a little bit. For any old timers who visited us when we were in the trailers at the Allen Vineyard, my office looked, you know, listen, it was a trailer. It wasn't much of an office, but it was in the middle of the Allen Vineyard with a great view. And it looked out into the main part of the vineyard and across where we had 4 olive trees that Howie had planted. And so he would come every Friday. They had a house and a barn where he used to make a little bit of his own Allen Vineyard Pinot Noir, and he'd make olive oil. And so he would come every Friday in a little golf cart and bring either something to spray the tree with or to prune it and do something. So I'd walk out and talk to him every now and then and got to know him a little bit in his later years. Unfortunately, Howie passed in early 2013, and his son, Andrew and An, continue the partnership we have with them and the traditions that we've established with Williams Selyem. And the lighting behind me makes the story even better. But, you know, and if you visited the new winery, we actually have the Howard Allen Memorial tree planted right outside the tasting room. So he was a real big part of the winery getting established in the world-class grapes to allow us to do what we do. So we miss Howie. He was a great guy, but the tradition continues. And so I'm going to pass it on to Jeff now, and we'll start talking about the wines and the vintages. Jeff?
Cool. Thanks for that, Mark. Yeah, what a really incredible vineyard site the Allen Vineyard is. Planted in the 70s. Just to me, it has some of the most exquisite sort of aromas, flavors, and textures. It's definitely, as Scott mentioned, sort of one of our Grand Cru wines. Before we kind of dive into tasting the wines, we have a couple of different vintages: 2011, 2013, and 2015. And they're all really, each one has their own story, just like every vintage does. And, there's a lot of ways to sort of discuss a vintage, the bud break dates, the flowering dates. But I kind of drew together this sort of table that has a bunch of different numbers on it. I want to walk you through that real quick because it actually tells it's a very telling story as to why the vintages are very different. And one of the main measures that we use, Davis and a lot of other people use to kind of talk about vintages, is the growing degree day. And Scott, if you could throw that table up there. It's a little complicated, but I want to walk it through with you super quick. A growing degree day is sort of a measure of the temperatures above 50 degrees. 50 degrees is sort of an important temperature for where grapes are really metabolically active, right? So it's a good baseline to understand growth for the season. What I put there on the sort of the middle, the 10-year average, are these qualitative or quantitative numbers that for the last 10 years, kind of what sort of the framework for what I want to talk about. The growing degree day is measured from April through October, and it's basically a sum of those days above 50 degrees, the average of the high and the low. And so if you just look at the very bottom, the October number for 2011, 13, and 15, and you look at that 10-year average, you can see that 2011 was a really cool vintage. And I kind of summarized it on the right-hand side. It's on average about 15% cooler than most other vintages. And that was definitely true. I mean, it was a year where, it was a cool growing season throughout. We had a wet May, June, and harvest started very late in 2011. 2013 was kind of looking at that October number, the yellow highlight. Those were sort of above average or right around average in terms of the total number of days, warmth throughout the growing season. Couple things, like the May, June, that's typically where we have flowering. And, what's really interesting about 11 and 15, we had very, very low yields in both of those vintages. And it really relates to the coolness of the vintage. And you can see that they were both, looking at the percentages, they were 26 and 12% cooler on average. 2013 was an interesting vintage because it had actually beautiful weather throughout. It was one of the warmer May, June periods, and as a consequence, we had really wonderful flowering, and it was a very bountiful vintage. And so it was just kind of interesting to me when I was thinking about how to discuss what the differences between the different vintages, and to know, about the different flowering schedules and so forth, and actually seeing it in quantitative information was sort of fascinating to me. All of these vintages were, we can maybe switch the screen, Scott. All of these vintages were drought years. We had a period from 11 to about 2016 where we had below average rainfall. And that kind of, drove, it was a drier winter. Flowering was bud break was a little bit earlier in most, during those time between 11 and 16. And so we had, lots of frost issues in some of those years, which also kind of created lower yields in those vintages. So that's sort of an overview of the different vintages. Let's talk a little bit about let's talk about the Allen Vineyard in general. It's up on the hillside, as Mark sort of described, up above the Rochioli Vineyard. It's typically one of our first vineyards that we pick because it's on the hillside, a little drier soil. Bud break happens a little sooner there. It's a real gravelly kind of soil. Typically the wines have a floral, red fruited sort of nose and palate, but wonderful texture. And if we let's go ahead and taste the 2011. Again, that was one of the cooler vintages that we've had. Very, very late picked. We didn't start picking Allen until the end of September, which is really unusual. Typically we're picking Allen in mid-August. And just looking at those numbers, it definitely kind of told the story of it being a very cool year. When I put my nose in the glass, and I'm definitely getting sort of that strawberry, red fruit, red cherry kind of notes. There's a tiny little bit of floral, dried flowers, that kind of thing. There's definitely a cool fruit character. And I think with the 2011 vintage, it being a generally cool year, that kind of shows in the wine. I don't know, what do you guys think? Sandra?
Sandra's muted. So I'll jump in. Yeah, I think it's amazingly fresh. At 9 years, I still get that that cherry aspect in it coming through nicely, but it's still while the primary fruit's starting to drop off, it's still tasting very young. It's still got a lot of tannin in the mid palate and all that. So I think it's doing wonderfully, and I think the 11s in general. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but given the cool nature of the vintage, we expected the 11s to age, pretty long.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think with the cool vintages, you tend to preserve the acidity, even though it's picked a little bit later in the calendar year. You tend to preserve that acidity. What's sort of remarkable, I think, about cool vintages, and I think 10 is sort of in that category as well, where you have this nice long ripening process, and you have this wonderful resolution and concentration of the tannin. And in the cool vintage, you're just not getting that really dramatic sugar accumulation. So the alcohols tend to be a little bit more balanced in the cooler vintages. And it definitely highlights, I think, the prettiness of Pinot Noir. And it certainly, the 11 highlights the classiness, I think, of the Allen Vineyard. It's a really tremendous wine, actually.
I think classy is definitely the operative word. As Mark was saying, it's remarkable at 9 years old. Looking at the color too, yes, the pigmentation is starting to fade just a hint, but it's at the point where the tertiary flavors are coming together and melding, and that's such a beautiful thing. And if we were talking about a 9-year-old Pinot Noir from somebody else, I think we'd say, this is kind of shot. But not this. This is still hitting its stride really well. It's beautiful wine.
And texturally, it's still kind of coming together, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about Allen and Rochioli both, is they really develop wonderful textures with even more age. And Mark and I have had the fortunate opportunity to taste a lot of older vintages of both of these wines over the years. And gosh, I remember the 1992, 93 Allens, the early 90s Allens are still just absolutely exquisite wines today.
Yeah, and the question about when to open wines is always tricky because a lot depends on storage conditions and things like that. And generally on vineyard designates, we tell people they'll be at their peak in 5 to 7 years from the vintage date, but that doesn't mean they can't go remarkably longer. The 92 Allen that Jeff's talking about, we had about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, in January, and it was still fresh, but some other more recent vintages were definitely over the hill. So while the wine's can sometimes go 30 years. They're definitely not all going to go 30 years, but 5 to 7 is generally the safe period. But if you like those aged characteristics of Pinot Noir, you can certainly push the envelope quite a bit, especially with the Allen Vineyard, the Rochioli Vineyard, some of our top vineyard designates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's a good segue into the 13, which that's about 7 years of age. I think that's a really great time to be enjoying, our wines. 13, that graph was up there just briefly, but, just looking down at the numbers, I mean, everything about it was sort of average in terms of, the flowering weather, the bud break time, and sort of it enjoyed a really nice long growing season. And the real interesting thing is we got this wonderful heat in the May and June sort of period where we had great flowering. And that's sort of an important time in the kind of the timeline of the plant. It's developing wonderful tannins and, really kind of moving the plant along in the right direction as far as tannin resolution and tannin ripeness. It's sort of one of the unsung vintages, I think, 2013. 12 was such a great year, and 14, and so 13 was sort of lost in sort of the kind of the acclaim for these, that trio of vintages. Tasting the 13 today, wow, this wine's really coming together. The tannins are starting to soften a little bit. It still has that sort of dark strawberry, dark cherry notes, and like dried rose petals, that kind of thing. These wines were really shut down when we bottled them, the 13s, and I think they're just now sort of emerging as, a vintage to reckon with. Actually, I'm always pleasantly surprised at how put together the 13s are, and I think looking back on the vintage itself, there were no heat spikes in 13. It was a nice, long, protracted, growing season with a lot of sun, no real issues. And I think from a weather perspective, and the wines are really showing some balance and precision.
There's some great perfume coming out of the nose on this too. The crushed rose petals that you mentioned, even violets. I think you're onto something.
Yeah. No, and to me, that's Allen at its best when it has some of those floral notes and, beautiful texture, red fruited. I remember talking and tasting with Bert a number of times, and this was always one of his favorite wines. It happens to be one of my favorites. Kind of what got me started on Williams Selyem was early Allen Vineyard Pinot Noirs. And it's John Dyson's favorite wine as well. And, I remember asking Bert, what are some of the things that you liked about Allen? And a lot of it was the prettiness, that finesse. It can be a very powerful wine, but it has wonderful layers and textures that does allow it to age. There's minerality, there's, sort of like a quiet power behind the wine. And no matter what vintage it is, it always has these characteristics, and it's a wonderful vineyard. Always one of my favorites.
Year in, year out, it tends to be, when we taste the wine side by side, Allen tends to be, top 3 every year. It's great. And I don't want to dive too far into the comments. So I just, and they've taken away my ability to actually type the comments. But I do want to say, shout out to Herb Karlitz, and ask why I did not get invited to the blind tasting where he threw the 85 Rochioli Vineyard up against DRC Richebourg. So, Herb, come on, my number. Back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, so let's move on to the 15. 15 was a dramatic vintage. It was a drought year, one of the lowest rainfall years in that 10-year span. We had a very dry winter. I'd never seen bud break. This is my 20th vintage, and I'd never seen bud break in February, early February. And this was a year where we had bud break in February. It was kind of crazy. Cool weather, throughout the early part of the growing season. and just kind of looking down at my note, we did have a very cool, rainy May, June, right during the flowering period, and that kind of inhibited fertilization of the flowers, and so we had a very, very low crop that year. But then the rest of the growing season, it was warm. Grapes were ripening at a really kind of exponential rate, and to make 2015 even more dramatic, because we had early bud break and it was a light crop, 2015 we saw our very first pick at the end of July, which again was sort of unheard of. Everything was very early that year. Smelling and tasting the 15, Allen, I mean, the color is just amazing. It's really dense, again, owing to the really small berries, lots of anthocyanin, very low yield, and these wines are very concentrated across the board, and that's what happened, I think, throughout Russian River and the Sonoma coast. Definitely a darker cherry kind of note to me in the wine. On the palate, it's still quite a young wine, being a 2015. Still, the tannins are a bit, I don't want to say edgy, but they're definitely substantial in the wine. Needs definitely a few more years. But you can definitely taste, the potential there. There's a nice minerality sort of underlying, citrus peel, that kind of thing. When these wines went into the bottle, I was super excited about the vintage. I think it could potentially be one of the best vintages that we've had in a number of years. Only time will tell, but I think there's so much concentration in the 15s in general that make them, sort of just a standout. I think they're really kind of shocking wines in a way because they're so concentrated. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, for as elegant as it is, it's still very, very powerful, and it is still really young. I do remember when we released these, Bert Williams, because we were making a Bert Williams Morning Dew Ranch in 15. He came to a little pouring we were doing, and when I told him that we harvested in July, I thought it was going to fall down. He said the earliest he had ever harvested was August 27th. Was the earliest he had harvested Pinot Noir grapes. So that tells you how radically different 15 was.
Yeah,
and obviously we've harvested in early August since then, but July is just really unheard of.
Yeah, no, it was such a dramatic year, but really super pleased with these wines. They'll definitely need a few more years, I think, to come around. But for as young as it is, I mean, with the right food, I think that'll be a wonderful wine to drink, in the near term. Yeah.
In addition to some of the notes you're talking about, guys, I definitely get this very intriguing brown sugar kind of cola element, kind of over caressing it, if you will. And I recall in 2015, my wife and I on Valentine's Day were climbing Mount St. Helena in snow, and on the 23rd was bud break in Napa. So at that time, I was at Domaine Carneros, and I remember having the harvest party in July, and the CEO and winemaker gets up and says, "I know you think I'm crazy that we would have a harvest party in July, but the guys over at this table will be picking tonight at midnight."
Yeah.
On the 1st of August. So yes, it's champagne, you pick earlier, but.
Yeah, dramatic year. So it's what's kind of cool about these different vintages. I mean, for me, intimately knowing the details about each of the vintages, I can find those characteristics in each one of these wines, still with the common thread of, the red fruits and the textures and the floral element. I wish everybody could be tasting these wines with us, because I think it's a really cool experiment.
I think there's actually one couple I saw very early on in the comments who are tasting all 6 wines with us.
Okay, good.
Lots of great wines being opened though, and lots of great questions, which I know that Scott will jump into later. So.
All right.
Yeah, speaking of questions and jumping into later, I think this is time for a good segue to take a break before we talk about the Rochioli Vineyard. What I wanted to do really quick is I wanted to do a segment to break up the action, and we're going to put Jeff Mangahas on the hot seat. So we're going to say goodbye to Mark and Sandra really quick. So Jeff, we have a couple questions I want to ask you in this new segment, the hot seat. And so Jeff has not heard any of these questions so far. This is all going to be new to him. So we're going to ask him a couple questions, then we're going to dive back into the action and try some Rochioli. So
right.
Jeff Mangahas, the first question we have written in from a viewer. Her name is Claire Herman. She's 3 years old. She happens to be my daughter, and she wants to know, what is your favorite color?
Oh gosh, even if it's a color, it's actually the shirt that I'm wearing right now, gray. I don't know, is that
Nice.
a color? It is.
That works, absolutely. Yeah. You can even go silver if you want to up it a notch.
Silver,
that works,
yeah.
Yeah.
Little fancy.
So, so next question from not Clara this time, but what is your favorite daily drinker? Like, what's your wine that you go to more often than not?
Oh wow. I mean, typically, I'm a student of wines of the world, but if I always have a bottle of, when I'm not drinking our own wines, I always have a bottle of Rochioli Sauvignon Blanc in the fridge.
Ooh, good choice.
It's
they actually just,
delicious.
I think, released the 19, and it's freaking delicious. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, and it's great value as well. Super easy drinker, throughout the year. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What would you consider your favorite Williams Selyem wine you've ever tasted or experienced?
Wow. That mentioned earlier about the 92 Allen, that just floored me how wonderfully fresh and exciting. I had this wonderful opportunity to taste all vintages of the Allen Vineyard with Steve Tanzer a number of years ago. And I think that post is still probably on Vinous somewhere. But that was one of my absolute favorite wines in the world, actually.
Wow.
92 Allen. Pretty outstanding.
That was a really cool tasting. You tasted how many vintages in that tasting?
Oh, I think we didn't. We had all the vintages except the very first one. So
wow.
I think there was no 88.
Wow.
But yeah, we tasted all the wines side by side. It was pretty outstanding experience. Yeah.
And you even left a little bit for me and Mark afterwards, which we really appreciate.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. What's your favorite beverage to geek out on that's not wine?
Wow. I'm a big fan of whiskeys, all different types. So yeah, I'm always kind of studying different things, and whether it be single malt or bourbon or something like that. So yeah, there's a whole world. I mean, it's a fascinating world actually of the different mash bills and different flavors and aging and all that. It's I love it.
I don't think we've talked about that yet. I'm gonna have to bug you about that, because I just started geeking out on it too. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking to my wife Brooke about this. I think like bourbons versus like nice single malts from Scotland. I feel like the wines or the bourbons or the whiskeys rather I like are more like Pinot Noir, like with the funk and the peats and the other. So anyway, that's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you consider is your favorite child?
My favorite child.
You have to say Mia.
Well, yeah, I thought you were thinking of wines, but no. Well, but just I only have one, so
good. Makes it easy that way. Yeah,
it's super easy.
Good.
That was a trick question.
It was.
Yeah.
What do you consider your favorite or most memorable vintage?
Wow, so many. Each one has a different story. I think, that's a good question. Each one has a special moment for me. Each of the years. I think my very first vintage here was 2011, which had some challenges because of the cool year. But tasting that wine, I'm super proud of it. So that would have to be up there as well in terms of like favorite vintages.
Cool.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, it's probably some of the more challenging years where I think the successes of those wines really kind of come through. But being the diplomatic sort of answer is that each one's kind of interesting to me, and I have a memory of each one of them. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What do you consider your favorite wine food to dive into?
Favorite wine food. I'm a big fan of Japanese food, and I think there's a lot of pairings that could, like super interesting pairings. I actually love Pinot Noir with sushi, and Japanese foods, all types of things, but sushi and Pinot Noir really hits kind of some high notes. And if you haven't had that combination before, really fascinating. The delicate tannins of a mature Pinot Noir with, sashimi or, something rich and fatty is a really magical experience, actually.
We might have to do a webinar on that. We could do it.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Do it from our favorite sushi spot. Speaking of, what's your go-to if you're not gonna be cooking that night? What's your go-to, like, eat out? I guess takeout now more often, but
it's Hana Japanese for sushi. That's
shout out. Yeah,
that's the only place that I go. So it's pretty epic. And
have they put a plaque on your special table yet? The Jeff table?
No, it is well known, regardless. But the food there is just absolutely exquisite.
So good. If you guys haven't been there, next time you come to Sonoma Wine Country, it's in a very unusual spot, but it is the best sushi in town. So good.
Yeah, super good.
Yeah. My wife is going to want me when I get home, just to be like, let's go there right now. What is this kind of goes back to child. What is the bottling that you're most proud of?
Bottling that I'm most proud of, as far as like a wine, or just like,
if you want to take that somewhere else, you can do that too.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, Allen sort of has a special place in my heart, just because of I think a lot of things. It got me introduced into the world of Williams Selyem, but I love that sort of juxtaposition of power and finesse at the same time, and the potential ageability. I mean, it's one of the classic wines, in my opinion, certainly of Williams Selyem, but classic wines of California.
I totally agree.
It's to me, it's unparalleled. We have so many wonderful wines. Rochioli's incredible. Our estate is incredible as well. But having this sort of track record with Allen, it's something that I always want to reach for. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. What is your favorite varietal that you don't currently work with?
Favorite variety? Well, I do love drinking, great wines from the Rhone Valley, particularly the northern Rhone. So like Syrah, we've had some incredible bottles. Those are really challenging wines to make, and I think the northern Rhone does it incredibly well. And those are wonderful wines. I really
super good.
Yeah.
Super good.
Yeah,
absolutely. Who is your favorite colleague to work with? And why is it me? No, you don't have to answer that. That's fine.
I love my whole team.
But really quick, someone was asking for the name of the sushi place again. That's Hana Sushi. Hana, yeah. And I think it's written on the chat there again too. So very good. Then last one, Jeff.
More specifically, it's Hana Japanese.
Thank you.
I think. Yeah, Hana Sushi. There's another Hana in Sebastopol as well, but the one that I go to is Hana Japanese. Yeah,
which I'm sure is lovely as well. And so last but not least, what is the favorite first wine you remember trying?
Favorite first wine? There's a number of them, but I'd have to go, since I'm a Pinot Noir geek. It's a Burgundy that I really remember. The layers, the textures, the aroma, and not that dissimilar to the Allen. Just this red fruit and floral kind of characteristics. It's a producer called Vogüé in Burgundy. One of just lasting memories of incredible wine. It was a Grand Cru vineyard from the 90s that I tasted, which left a really strong impression of me about how wonderful Pinot Noir could be. Yeah.
And now look at you. making some good stuff. I'm sure that would rival that. So you're saying it wasn't White Zinfandel? That wasn't the first love?
No, didn't come out of a box either.
That may have been my first love. We'll get to that another time. Good. Well, thank you, Jeff, for playing the hot seat game. And yeah, let's get back to the action. Let's talk about the Rochioli Vineyard. We've already talked about that a little bit. So let's bring Mark and let's bring Sandro back into the broadcast. And Mark, let's talk about a little bit of a Rochioli history. Why don't you take it away?
Well, so Joe Rochioli is an amazing storyteller. And I got to hear firsthand a number of times him tell about the history of how he got into grape growing and really the high end of grape growing. So the Rochioli Vineyard has been in the family for a few generations. Joe grew up at the farm, and in the mid 60s, he got the idea that California could produce Pinot Noir and Chardonnay at the same level as they do in Burgundy. And so he went to his dad and said, I want to plant these, as he calls them, varietals. And his dad said, no, you gotta plant the cash crop grapes. You gotta plant the Gamay, things that people blend. And so he wouldn't let him do that. And so then he finally talked him into letting him do a small plot, but said, you have to hedge your bets here. So you're going to plant green beans down the center of the row. And so they still are these, I think, 12-foot spaced rows. And he had green beans down the center. And as he said, he didn't know that there could be that many green beans in the world, literally, from what he produced at the vineyard. And then he says, and his dad died in 1967. So he immediately ripped out all those, basic varietals and started planting the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And it really put a stamp for California wine and Sonoma County. It really helped put us on the map because everyone says that great wine is made in the vineyard. And, going back to when Bert started, he would say, sometimes you'd get great Pinot Noir, and then the next year, what happened? Well, no one was really trying to farm to make world-class Pinot Noir. And Joe Rochioli in the late 60s went out on a limb and planted these wines so that when folks like Bert Williams and Ed Selyem came along in the early 80s, they could make those world-class wines. So really, Joe is responsible for a lot of what Sonoma County and the Northern California Pinot Noir has become. He was really a visionary, and it's still just a simple farmer, and we still see him out there, and Tom tries to keep him off the tractor. But he really did put it on the map, put Williams Selyem on the map, and in turn, Williams Selyem notoriety with the Rochioli Vineyard wines helped put Rochioli on the map. So it's a great partnership, and we love Joe. He still, anytime I see him, he complains about the traffic on West Side Road, and I try to subtly remind him that he's kind of responsible for it. So I'll turn it back to Jeff to talk a little bit about the wines from the Rochioli Vineyard.
Yeah, it's history, right? Rochioli Vineyard. He was a pioneer on West Side Road, and other prominent families like the Bacigalupis have a long history here as well. But yeah, he definitely set the pace for premium wine grapes. And tasting through these wines, it's so fascinating because we're talking about the differences in the vintage, but Rochioli, where it's situated along the riverbank, really deep soils, it kind of doesn't it doesn't even matter what the vintage conditions are like. There's such similarity in terms of concentration in these wines. It has a typical, to me, Rochioli, particularly this wine, the Riverblock, planted in 1989, right on the the edge of the river there. They're basically, these plants are dry farmed because they don't have, they have this incredible root system. So no matter if it's a really hot year or a cool year, the plants never really kind of stress out too much. And you can definitely really taste, the deep, dark, sort of flavor profile. There's a little bit of like a dried herb character. And here's an interesting example. There's a lot of wild fennel and a lot of dry, like wild thyme and all these herbs that sort of live in the vine rows and around the edge of the vineyard. And to me, I can always pick up that sort of dried fennel, sort of characteristics. I don't know. Do you guys get that in the Mark or Sandra? It's
Yeah,
sort of to me
definitely
a quintessential Rochioli thing, and it adds complexity.
It definitely adds layers.
Yeah.
I think it really comes out more with the aging of the wine as well. I get when it's young, I think Rochioli tends to have more of a like that dominant fruit forward piece of it, but the minerality and that herbaceousness definitely starts to pick up after a few years.
Yeah, and certainly with the 11 being a cooler vintage, I think it's highlighted a little bit more in the 11 river block, as where the 13 and the 15, those wines are really quite similar, in terms of their concentration and depth and layers, that brooding sort of characteristic. What a fascinating wine. And it's, it just, in the glass, they've evolved so much actually in the last hour since, we've been tasting them. 11, that cool vintage again, you get some of that cool fruit character, just like we saw with the Allen 11. But really, it does have some dark concentrated flavors on the back end. Really quite delicious as well. I'd be drinking this now if you guys have it at home.
Absolutely. And the layers in there, we were talking earlier about the tertiary aspects of it.
Yeah.
And they're really coming together. And when Mark says herbaceousness, we're not talking about pyrazines that kind of give you that bell pepper, that kind of herbaceousness. It's a beautiful, perfumed, integrated aspect to it, and makes it all the better for wine and food pairings.
And that's, herbaceous sort of qualities as it relates to Pinot Noir are actually, in my opinion, sort of varietal, right? Pinot Noir has dried herb kind of characteristics and, tea-like elements and red fruits. Those to me are all sort of classic Pinot Noir descriptors in general. Moving over to the 13, wow, this wine's kind of hitting its stride right now too. Definitely sort of that mix of, some secondary aromas, but definitely has a dark fruit character to it, a primary fruit character, I should say. But the concentration on the palate is so compelling to me. This wine's just starting to show what it has. I think it's another classic, another example of, I think, a classic vintage, the 13.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just starting to show its stuff. I opened this, all of these wines about 3 hours ago. And one of the things we were talking about offline earlier is about to me, it was remarkable pulling these corks, and I didn't need an osso. The corks were very much intact. And they may sound like a kind of a minor thing, but when you're producing high quality luxury wines like this, every detail matters. And you can tell whether it was Jeff, Bob, or Bert, they paid attention to every detail, and that's what makes these world-class wines.
Yeah, that's kind of in our DNA, is the attention to detail in everything we do. Back to the wine though, Jeff. It's the concentration on this. If I were doing this blind, I would not think this was a 7-year-old wine. This to me tastes like it. Could be from the 17 vintage, maybe 16. It's still young and fresh, and I'm still getting that, that primary raspberry characteristic out of it.
Yeah.
And a little less of, and it might be a vintage variation, but a little less of that fennel and those other aspects.
Yeah. I think the warmer vintages tend to, you got a little bit more polish, I think, to the tannins, and there's less of the sort of herbaceous sort of character. And I mean that in a good way. It's there, but it's definitely more layered in with the other sort of elements. Jumping to the 15, it's really fascinating because here this wine still smells very primary, right? I mean, this is a 5-year-old wine. It just, as where the 13 has a little bit of primary to secondary, and as you said, Sandra, the 11 starting to show a little bit more of the tertiary and those kind of elements. So it's kind of cool to see that evolution in the different vintages. But just like the 13, the 15 Riverblock it's so concentrated and it's almost it hasn't fully formed on the palate yet. But you can really taste the 13 and the 15 are brothers, right? They came from the same place. They have the same sort of texture, the same sort of level of concentration. Really fascinating.
Hey, Jeff, I've seen, just because we're talking vintages, I've seen a few questions about the 14 vintage pop up.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about 13 and 15 being brothers, sorry to put you on the spot, but I know you have this stuff on like that.
Yeah.
So just, what was the 14 vintage like?
So 14 was a really incredible vintage as well. I mean, we had just this string of very good vintages. 14 was similar to 13 in the sense that it had a nice long growing season. It was sort of average in its bud break. It had a very a good flowering schedule, but enjoyed nice long sunny days. And so it was kind of a normal, quote unquote, normal vintage. We didn't have heat spikes. We didn't have overly cool periods. So the grapes really kind of sort of marched along and ripened at a very linear sort of rate. Picked when we wanted to pick. There were no issues with fruit integrity. And that really shows in the 14s. I think the 14s also have this incredible, sort of balance between concentration and perfume and elegance. But because they had really nice, enjoyed a nice sort of sunny, period during the critical time of the growing season, that the tannins have incredible polish to them. So 14 is also a really highly touted, wonderfully concentrated vintage.
Which other vintage around there would you compare it most to? 14
and 17 are pretty, in terms of like flavor profile. 17, we had a little bit more heat towards the end. But since we're early pickers anyways, that didn't really bother us so much. 12 is also one of those really nice, 12, 13, and 14 were sort of that sort of triumvirate of really incredible vintages. And the 12s are delicious as well. Didn't mean to skip over the 12s, but those are showing really nice right now as well. So
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're going to toss it back to Scott. And I just want to say for all those folks who are chiming in that their allocations are showing up during this presentation. we are in shipping season, so hopefully everyone who's expecting a package is getting it safely right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. That was so fun to go through those wines. Thank you to everyone that joined us as well with all the fun wines around the country and even internationally. I saw some folks from Toronto on there too. What we wanted to do, we've got a couple of minutes left. Love to do a little Q&A. And so there's a couple great questions that were featured throughout the chat here. And if you have any other specific questions, go ahead and throw it in right now. But we always get this question, so might as well start with this, even though it can be hard to answer sometimes. But Harvey, near the beginning of the presentation, asked, hey, when is the best time to drink these wines? So why don't we start with just a general overview of when we typically like to recommend these wines being enjoyed?
Yeah, I think in general, the right time, I love saying this because the right time to open a wine is when you open it, right? The moment, what food you're serving, all that kind of stuff, the company, that kind of thing. Our wines, everybody's a longtime fan of Williams Selyem. You know our wines have a very wide drinking window, right? You're enjoying, even with the 15s that we're tasting today, real primary fruit character, really delicious, right? And then you start to get into more earthy and secondary flavors and aromas. there's never a wrong time to open a bottle. Certainly, given the state of the world, and that kind of thing. But certainly our vineyard designate quality level sort of wines, coastal wines, precious mountain, those do kind of require, the 13, 7, 5, 7 years, I think is not unreasonable to enjoy them. And then, wines like our Sonoma County and Russian River, our Appalachian and regional type wines, those you can enjoy a little bit sooner because they're a little bit softer. They don't have as much oak in them. They're a little bit more pleasurable on the earlier side. But yeah.
It's great.
I think also, if I could just add one thing in, Scott,
yeah.
The question also has to be about how do you like your wine? Some people don't like aged wines. Some people like them in their youth. But then I also often talk about the dual evolution. Not only is the wine evolving, but our palates are evolving. So maybe when you first start out in the first 5, 10 years, you only like wines that are young and fresh and vibrant. But then you kind of turn that corner and you go after those subtle nuances, the secondary and tertiary flavors, and you have that now appreciation for them all coming together. So that's the question you got to ask yourself first and foremost: at what stage do you like them?
Yeah,
I mean, here's always the experiment where, should your allocation warrant it, buy a whole case of something and drink it over, over the course of 12 years.
No, Sandro's got a really great point, and I've made this a number of times during our pickup weekends, either here or out at Millbrook. You have to like what the wine turns into. One of my favorite examples is my brother likes Old Barolo, and he gave me something from the late 60s, I think, and I literally smelled it and said, "It smells like crap." And he's like, "Exactly." And I mean, right? I meant, no, the barnyard aromas were so strong that I don't like my wines aged to that level where all you get is those tertiary characteristics, not the primary fruit. So you really have to like what a wine turns into if you're going to age it more than, the 5 to 7 year element.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's pull another question in. We get this question often as well. So John Neely asked, do you have any recommendations on how long to open the wine? So do you decamp our Pinot Noirs? How long before you typically service them? Do you open them? Did you guys have any general thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if it's a young wine, easily 2, 3, 4 hours starts the process. Older wines tend to fall apart a little more quickly, right? So I don't personally enjoy a wine where I've opened it too soon. It's an older wine, a 10 or a 15-year-old wine, and it's kind of lost some of the prettiness. Certainly younger wines. Sometimes I find actually if it's a really young wine, a couple-year-old wine, sometimes the next day is actually pretty outstanding, actually. So that's where you have to kind of know, maybe the more tannic the wine. If it's a coastal wine, it might need more time to open up. So you kind of have to understand which wine it is. And, what I like to do at dinner parties, which is always kind of fun having a dinner party at our house, well, pre-COVID. But what I like doing is having a lot of different wines open. And I'm kind of famous for opening, for even a small group of people, opening 6 or 8 different types of wines. And so you're watching them evolve over the course of an evening and a meal. And so you're only taking a splash of each one, and you're really kind of aerating it and seeing how the wine changes with the food and your mood and all sorts of factors. So again, it is kind of a bit of a personal question. If you like, certainly depends on what type of meal you're eating it with or enjoying the wine with. But
yeah, Jeff's very thoughtful about this. I pop and pour. I rarely you can. And if you want to take Jeff's approach and you can plan out 2 to 3 hours, and that's awesome. Usually I'm about to serve dinner, I'm like, I need red wine. And so, it depends on who you are.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I didn't see in the question was whether they're decanting it for those 2 to 3 hours. So if you're not, I would definitely expedite the process by decanting. And remember, we decant for 2 different reasons, one of which is when it's a young wine, you want to be very vigorous and get that in the decanter very quickly. Unless it's an older wine, you want to go very slowly and hold back all that sediment.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't really get sediment in Pinot Noir, though. So that, generally, I mean, you get sometimes a little tartar crystals, but in general, if you can decant, also use an aerator if you want. I'll do that on some, like if I'm drinking a current vintage, I might throw an aerator into it, and just to get those volatiles mixed up a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I like this question. This could go off on a long tangent, but I'm going to ask it anyway and see if we can keep the answer on the briefer side. But interesting question from Rob Gibson. He asked about vineyards and said, can you remind us which vineyards we own and what are the advantages of owning versus working with contracts?
Yeah. So we own, really 4 vineyards around here. The Williams Selyem estate, which is on the property for our new building, our Drake Vineyard, the Lewis McGregor estate over on the east side of the river, and our latest addition as of 2016, our Cytone estate, Zinfandel Vineyard. And then John Dyson also owns the Vista Verde Vineyard. So effectively 5 vineyards that we own. And, farming is very expensive in general to achieve this level of quality. And so I work really closely with our growers to achieve, whatever vision there is for high quality. And a lot of our growers know what that is. But every time I'm asking them to go through and drop some fruit to rebalance the vines, it costs money. And that's always a discussion point that we need to have, every year. If it's our own estate vineyard, I mean, if I feel like, we need to have 10 clusters on a plant, hopefully our CFO is not listening to this right now. If we need to have 10 clusters on a plant for wine quality to balance the plant in a given season, then it's not even a question. That's what we do. So our farming costs are extremely high here at Williams Selyem, and that really kind of is directly correlated, I think, to the quality of the wines that you're tasting. And so I never have to have that discussion. It's really, if that's what I feel like we need to do on our estate vineyards, then that's what we do. So it really kind of comes down to ultimate control, I think, in our vineyards when we own them. As it relates to contracts, I mean, they're willing to do whatever it takes as well. But I have to be cognizant that it's somebody else's money, really, that I'm asking them to do something for us.
Yeah, there was a second part to that question about access to vineyards, and we have over the years lost access to a couple of vineyards. A good example was Burt Williams' Morning Dew Ranch. When Burt sold the ranch, it was then owned by another group that wasn't farming in the exact way that Jeff wanted, and so we let those contracts go. There are other cases like the Pay Vineyard, where their own wine brand got to the point where they needed all their fruit. And then there's, for instance, we're bringing back Hirsch, which we had a couple of years where we didn't have it, and we're introducing up in Mendocino to replace Morning Dew Ranch, the Savoy Vineyard. So there's a little bit of come and go with the vineyards. I know we're excited about the Savoy Vineyard. Vineyards will come and go a little bit, but generally, we have long-term contracts and great partnerships with all of our growers. So it really isn't a concern, which is, I'm trying to answer the question the way it was asked. Are we concerned about it? Not really. Sometimes like with the Pays, they needed all their fruit. We get that. And there's not a lot of fruit out on the Sonoma coast that's high enough quality to replace that vineyard.
Right. Yeah. Great. Yeah, thank you for answering that question. I know we're going over a little bit, but I think we have time for two more. So, and Mark, we get this question a lot, so I'll let you take this one as well. This is from Lola Jordan, and Lola says, "Why is our allocation on Allen so low? What's especially after this tasting? I'm sure we'll get questions like that."
It's basic math. It's a small vineyard where we don't make much of it, and we're trying to allocate it out to as many people as possible, which means the allocations are therefore low. So for instance, the highest quantity of wine we make every vintage is usually our Russian River blend. That's going to be your highest allocation. The lowest quantity is usually Allen and Precious Mountain. And for most people, that's, if you've been on the list for a while, you might get an allocation of 2 bottles, usually only 1. Folks that are newer usually don't even get the allocation. And it's just a matter of how much of it we make versus how many list members we have.
Right.
We would make more Allen Pinot Noir if we could.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I always like to give
to that point. A place like Precious Mountain or Allen, it's only like 5 acres, and these older plants tend to produce less and less grapes as time goes on, right? So, and then you throw in vintages like 11 and 15 where Mother Nature has set the crop really low for us. There's just not enough land, there's not enough vines to produce, the level of wines that, to give everybody a bottle.
And I'll add really quick that I always like to give the example of coastlands where most years we're able to make a couple hundred cases, and there was that one year we only made about 75 cases, and so we had some people ask us, "What did I say? I only got allocated 1 bottle when I got like 3 last year." And so like Mark said, the math is going to change every year, and we'll do the best we can to try to share the wealth. And they're going to sell out fast.
Yeah.
The 15 vintage of Coastlands, we made 66 cases, and the 16 vintage, we made just shy of 500. So
there you go.
It's almost a factor of 10 there. And so, that's farming in California.
Yeah. On the coast.
All right. Well, last question, because we've been asked this a couple times, and I like the way that Pat framed this is, have we been impacted by the wildfires, and is there anything we can do to help locals? I would think that's a great way to put it. Thanks for asking, Pat.
Yeah. It has been a crazy year for sure. The early fires in August, and the second fire, the glass fire. Thankfully, from everybody here at Williams Selyem was safe. We definitely had to evacuate on West Side Road. People kind of got scattered here and there, but everybody was thankfully safe. We got a good percentage of the harvest in before the fires. So I think we're actually kind of sitting in good shape overall. Things like Chardonnay and Zinfandel, were not affected by the wildfires. So thank goodness for that. There's definitely a few wines that were affected, and unfortunately we won't be making a few wines that were heavily impacted. So more to come on that, but definitely a challenge there across the board.
And the best way to help the locals, there's really 2 different things I would say. One is, when it's safe in terms of your own comfort level with coronavirus, come visit. The winery is open and doing tastings outside. The restaurants have takeout and eating outside, like I'm sure in most of your communities. So the best thing you can do is support Sonoma County, buy Sonoma County wines, come and visit. If you literally want to donate money to help locals, I would recommend the Sonoma County Vintners Emergency Fund, if you look up Sonoma County Vintners, it's on their homepage. I'm part of the board that helps distribute those funds that go out, and we help a ton of local charities, whether it's through short-term donations that we give them or bigger long-term donations. So, we started that with the 2017 fires and continue it now. That is a way to do it just remotely, but we'd much prefer that you come and visit us in Sonoma County. And actually, that's a good segue, Scott, if you want to say anything about tasting.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been able to host tastings here for the last couple months. As Sandra knows, we're very blessed to have lots of people requesting. We're full most days. And so if you happen to be one of those people that are either in the area or feel safe about visiting the area, we'd love to see you. And for those that don't feel that way, that's why we started our virtual tasting program. So if you're curious about that, go ahead and reach out to tours@williamselyem.com. And we'd love to have a conversation about how we can get that set up for either you, your friends, your family for a special occasion. And that's been working out quite well. In addition, so we're rocking and rolling. We'd love to see you. We'd love to spend quality time with you, whether that be in person or in the comfort of your own home. And we're doing it. 2020, we're making it. It's the end of October. We're almost there. So,
and since Pete By asked, hey Pete, it's the Sonoma County Vintners Emergency Fund. And so if you go to sonomacountyvintners.com or just Google Sonoma County Vintners, you'll find it there. So just wanted to clarify that, because sometimes I speak a little too quickly.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Panelists, thank you for tasting the wines and for your wisdom and knowledge today. We can't wait to do this again. Again, we'll be doing this on a monthly basis. We'd love to hear from you, your feedback, any ideas for future topics you may want to hear about. You can also either add a comment in the chat or email us, and we'll look forward to coming live into your living rooms in the future as well. So everyone, stay safe, be well, go vote, be good, and can't wait to see you again. Cheers. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's go get sushi.
Sushi! Jeff, you're buying. All right. Good night, guys.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.